name of God, the most compassionate, most merciful, the peace and blessings of our Lord be upon his last messenger, Muhammad al-Mustafa, and upon his purified Ahli Bayt, his purified family. Welcome to this English episode of the first Albanian-American Bektashi Teqeja here in Taylor, Michigan. We welcome all of you and are happy to have you as our listeners. Today we wish to speak about Bektashi etiquettes and good manners, or character, which in Arabic is called adab and akhlaq. So the main source for us of our good character and good manners are our murshids, our babas and those dervishes who came before us. They set an example of what it is to be a true human being, a perfect human being, which we call insani kamil. And of course, they learn from their murshids, and so on back to the best of murshids, who is our Prophet ﷺ, and our Imam Ali and the holy Ahli Bayt and all of the 12 Imams. So what we would like today is to discuss what it is to have good manners in Bektashism. And I think that it's best to do this to read the words of someone who was a perfect murshid, a murshid-i kamil himself, and that was our Baba Rajab, who with his community had established this Teqeja over 65 years ago. So I would like to read what he wrote about this in his book Mysticisme Islam dhe Bektashisme, which is Islamic mysticism in Bektashism. So these are his words, and he stated the importance that good manners, good character play in being a Bektashi. So he says, exhibiting proper adab is obligatory according to the guidelines of our faith. Adab is an Arabic word meaning good manners or etiquette. Adab is the care a person takes not to violate the tranquility and order of wherever they should happen to be, either inside or outside of a religious setting. Bektashism insists on proper adab from the cradle to the grave. It ceaselessly instructs its followers not to offend or dishonor their fellow human being. They also mustn't be thrown into distress by anyone. Should someone abuse them, they mustn't return the abuse out of a desire for revenge. A true Bektashi mustn't even complain about the abuse. Rather, he must bear it with composure and dignity. He must be patient, forgive any insult, and do everything to manifest God's grace, which are consistent with the Quranic verse where God says, "And be patient, and your patience is not but by the assistance of God, and do not be upset because of them, and do not distress yourself at what they scheme. For God is with those who restrain themselves and those who do good." Surah An-Nahl, which is Surah chapter 16, verses 127 and 128. It's interesting as a side note that I remember one of our elders, Mr. Mergim Korcha, had done an interview with Baba Rajab. In the course of their discussion between Mr. Mergim and Baba, one of the members of the old Albanian Communist Party was brought up. I don't want to mention his name, but he was brought up, and of course he was a very big enemy of Bektashism and of religion in general, and of course this communist held a very big grudge against our Baba Rajab. So when Mr. Mergim had mentioned that this communist was ill, Baba's response was that I should pray for him more. So this is the sign of someone with true adab, with true morality, with true good manners and true character, that he held no desire or happiness to see that this man was ill, even though obviously he was an enemy of Baba's. but that he prayed for him and prayed for his well-being. And it was even discussed during the conversation that that even though this man was nearing the end of his life, that he was still an ardent atheist and a disbeliever, which Baba said that he had to pray for him even more, that God guide him and grant him what is best for him. But anyway, to continue with Baba's words. So he says, Adab in Bektashi mysticism is attained when the sun of spirituality starts reflecting off the mirror of a well-polished heart. Therefore, a Bektashi must continually exhibit adab, making sure that their hands, tongue, and loins never offend anyone. They must detach themselves from anger, greed, envy, and lustful cravings. They must see everything as a manifestation of God's power and grace. They must never see anything with the eye of annoyance or indignation. Instead, a Bektashi must always display a personality filled with serenity, compassion, and cheerfulness. They must be optimistic in every undertaking, and they must find delight when others find success in their undertakings. Let us ask ourselves how, especially if we are claiming to be Bektashis like this fakir, this poor one, how much we do this. Do we fit these words, or are we far from it? If we find ourselves, when we reflect on our own character, if we honestly find ourselves far from this position, then we have to do what we can do to reach this position. Because the one sure way to gain success in this life and then the next is to do as the Prophet ﷺ said, which is to die before you die. Mutu qabla an tamutu. To die before you die, which we can go on endlessly about this topic, but one of the things that we can take from these words is that we give up all of the commands of our ego, which of course always commands us to do objectionable things, to do things that are not proper, and which in the end will always find nothing. I was reading what they call Bektashi fikrase, which means I guess you can translate it as a Bektashi witticism or Bektashi joke. There was a story that there was a very poor dervish who once joined a caravan that was traveling from one city to the next. And this dervish, all he had was a blanket, his khirka, and his taj, his felt dervish crown. And he joined along with the people in the caravan, of course, very rich merchants and so on, people of means, people trying to make money here and there. So when the caravan entered the wilderness, some bandits came out of nowhere and they robbed everyone in the caravan. And when the bandits got to the dervish, they said, oh, this is just some poor fakir, this is just some poor homeless dervish who barely has anything. Hey dervish, since you have nothing that we want, just go sit under this tree over there while we continue to root through the bags and the luggage of all the people in the caravan. So the dervish said, Eyvallah, and he went and he sat over under the tree while he watched these bandits go through the saddle packs and the luggage of all the people, and they took what they wanted, and of course they had weapons, and the caravan was outnumbered, so there was nothing the people could do. And while the bandits were taking everything, of course everyone in the caravan were crying and wailing, and because they didn't want all of their goods taken away from them. And the bandits took what they wanted. They took, the gold and the nice silks and the expensive goods and all of that, and they disappeared back into the wilderness. And so when the people of the caravan, when they were kind of recovering from the shock of this robbery, they looked and they saw the dervish just smiling contently underneath the tree. And they went over to him. Of course, they were incensed. They were upset by the fact that they just had this disaster happen to them while this dervish is just sitting under the tree quite content with looking at the sight. So they came over to him and began to yell, "Dervish, what is wrong with you? Have you no pity? Don't you have any compassion for all of us who have just been robbed and you're just sitting there, like nothing had happened, like you're so happy?" And the dervish said, "Please, I beg your forgiveness. I beg your forgiveness. I'm not meaning to enjoy your misfortune, but the fact that this one time my poverty has given me privilege, so shouldn't I be happy?" It's kind of funny, it's kind of a little bit entertaining, but there is a deeper meaning to that this caravan, is going from the time we are born to the time we are leaving this life, which everyone does. Doesn't matter how young you are or how energetic and fresh you feel that you're going to live 1,000 years, you'll live forever, but death is always there. It's the inevitable end of everyone, of everything. I can still remember our Baba Arshi was with us almost 110 years. Baba Rajab was here, almost 95 years was with us. And where are they? They're gone. Our prophets, our imams, our Hazrati Pir, they are physically no longer with us. In the spiritual realm, that's a different story, but physically, they're gone because God, as God says in the Quran, "Nastauzubillah, kullu nafsin dha'ikatil maut," that every soul shall taste death, and that includes us. And I'm sure many of us can sit and remember people that we loved, people that we were close to, people that now only exist in our memory, and they're gone, and one day we'll be gone. So at least prepare something for that, where that caravan will end. And be like the dervish, be poor, be unattached. When the robbers come, which could represent the angel of death, when the robbers come and separate you from all the things you love in this dunya, your money, your wealth, your nice cars, your big houses, your bank accounts, your beautiful bride, your handsome husband, when the angel of death, who could represent those robbers in the story, they come and separate you from that. If you're like the dervish who has nothing, they say, "Okay, you just go sit over there and enjoy." So, inshallah, we can follow our Baba's words and be like that. But to continue, and we can finish with Baba's discourse on good manners. So, he continues and he says, "If the wayfarer should happen to become offended or displeased while sitting with a group of people, he or she should leave it diplomatically and gracefully, so as to make such an impression that it will serve as an example of politeness for those people, and perhaps stir them to change their discourteous ways." This is very interesting because I can personally attest that everything that Baba wrote in this book of his, which is a very, very beautiful book, and it was written for people who aren't necessarily well read in Islamic mysticism or who know a lot about history. He was a master in the way he presented all of this knowledge to people who may just be starting out with an interest in this path, who may not be great academics, but I can assure you, at least from what the few years that I came to visit him when he was still here in the physical realm, that he lived these words. So for instance, he's advising us that, if we happen to be with a group of people and we find them offensive or displeasing, that, we shouldn't just stand up and say, "I'm done with you." We should leave it in a very diplomatic way. And I remember it was the very first Ashura, I believe it was Ashura, it was a long time ago, and we had our community dinner. It was down in our social hall, which of course was much smaller then. And I remember that Baba stood up, and of course we sang the Mersiya to honor Imam Hussein, the Mersiya being the lament that is sung to mourn Imam Hussein's martyrdom. And after Baba had sang that along with those in the gathering who knew it, he began a speech. And I understood no Albanian at that time. So I didn't know what he was talking about. I can just still see him standing there behind the podium. And then he said something, and there was an older gentleman in the crowd who stood up and began yelling at the top of his lungs. And I don't know what the man was yelling about. And I thought like, oh Lord, there's gonna now be commotion and fighting and yelling and arguing. And I looked to Baba, and I was expecting some kind of reaction to this man yelling at him, you know, or yelling toward him. I didn't know what the yelling was about. Then I looked at Baba, and he just was holding the podium, and he stopped reading his speech and just put his head down. Just put his head down. The man continued to yell for a little bit. And when the man was finished, he sat down, and almost on cue, Baba started up again and continued speaking exactly where he left off. I mean, who can do that? Someone yells at us, we yell back. That's our ego's reaction. Someone offends us, we want to, you know, get revenge and offend them. But that day, or that evening, I learned that this man was something special. This man, you know, he walked the talk, as we say. What he was telling and advising all of us to do to gain perfection, he himself did. That memory of that stuck with me after all these years. That was almost 30 years ago. And I still can see him just with his head down. And he let the man, you know, vent his anger about whatever it was. Later I learned it was some political thing, you know, with Albanian politics. But Baba just stopped and let the man say what he wanted to say, and then he started back up without the slightest comment. So he advises us to do the same. If we find ourselves in a displeasing setting, that we should just gracefully leave, not make a big scene. So Baba continues. It is equally essential for the Bektashi to overlook people's shortcomings. He must avert his eyes from the failings and faults of others. Instead, he must check to see if these failings are present within himself, for only when he rectifies his own character can he help others do the same. The Bektashi secures the right to correct others only when he gains, through immense effort, and this is by no means something easy to do. It's a battle against the ego. As Baba said, the Bektashi wayfarer, he secures the right to correct others only when he gains, through immense effort, complete mastery of his hands, his tongue, and his loins. A Bektashi is religiously obligated to measure up to these and other points regarding adab, good manners. For without these, one cannot attain the goal of perfection. And with that, I wish all of you well, and I wish all of you peace and blessings until we see you again next time. Eyvallah, hu dost.